Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today we're going back to the 80s to see how sneakers and video games changed the world with a look at Tetris and Air on this random act of opinion coming up right now. The value of a story isn't always dictated by the importance of the events, opinion nerds. Our world is full of stories. Everything in life has a story behind it. If you know how to look, if you know how to see it, you can find the drama and emotion behind just about any series of events. And if you're a creative enough person, what you don't find, you can just make up. There are events that shape history and alter the very course of humanity, and there are events that only affect the life of a single person. But if you look at these events, large and small, you'll still find the stories of people just trying to make it from one end of life to another, doing the best they know how with the tools they have available. We don't tell these stories because they're significant or important. We tell them because they're meaningful, because they show us something about ourselves as people, how we love, how we overcome, and sometimes how we're willing to risk it all for something we believe in. For Hank Rogers, Tetris hit his life like a bolt of lightning. All he wanted to do was bring this little Russian game he believed in to the world. What he didn't want was to get caught in an ideological proxy war between capitalism and communism with the life of the game's developer hanging in the balance. Tetris is directed by John S. Baird from a screenplay by Noah Pink. The film stars Taron Egerton, Nikita Efremov, Toby Jones, Roger Allam, Anthony Boyle, Oleg Stefan, Igor Grabuzov, and Ayane Nagabuchi. Until a few years ago, Tetris was the biggest selling video game title in the world, but very few people know the story of how this piece of Cold War era programming broke barriers between East and West. Unfortunately, by the end of this film, they may not be much better educated about it. According to sources, namely Hank Green and Alexei Pajitnov, around whom the tale centers, Noah Pink's screenplay is a mostly exaggerated Hollywood concoction that sensationalizes events for the sake of entertainment. But that shouldn't be surprising. There's a reason a line of distinction exists between documentaries and cinema, and the facts of the tale have been covered by the BBC years ago. What Pink's screenplay emphasizes is the sense of personal danger to both men, the bond they form because of it, and the idea that getting the game out to the world was about more than a simple publishing deal. It was about people's lives. It was about systems of oppression and the way they keep people from achieving their dreams. It was, in no simple terms, about freedom. The film plays as a sort of light espionage adventure, with contracts over the game's multiple releases being the MacGuffin, and the goal being to make the series of relatively mundane contract negotiations appear to be far more exciting than they really were. The characters fall into certain broad categories. Hank, the big-mouthed, slightly boorish Westerner who lives in Japan with his Japanese wife and 3 Japanese children and yet can't speak the language, is the underdog caught between massive corporations and governments. Alexei is the sensitive genius trapped under the domineering heel of communist Russia. The antagonists, a pair of British media tycoons, their German stooge, and a Russian political agent, are played sometimes a bit arch in pursuit of the film's dynamic between humor and intrigue. The drama is kept on the lighter side, and the overall experience is geared towards highlighting the absurdity of the situation without stepping over the line into being a flat-out comedy. And by the end, the film will parallel the worldwide spread of the game with the fall of Soviet communism. It's as much of a reach as the film trying to portray Rogers' actions as rescuing the game and its power to bring people together from the clutches of corporate greed and ideological posturing by turning it over to Nintendo as the good corporation. Framing the presentation as a story being delivered by Hank allows for the shift that enables us to accept the video game-like structure and animated material as being how Hank subjectively experiences his own story, though mileage will vary on its effectiveness. It's an oddly framed package of storytelling that I can only describe as having an annoyingly contemporary aesthetic with its pastel colors and glossy but flat and slightly hazy cinematography. The film's score works to evoke the feel of 80s music in much the same way the scoring does for Stranger Things, by replicating the atmospheric sounds of classic 80s synthesizers and peppering the soundtrack with a handful of 80s pop songs sung in the language of whatever location the film happens to be in at the moment. Perhaps the most interesting, or frustrating depending on your perspective, creative choice is the use of 8-bit video game style animations, initially as transitions or as tools of exposition that eventually make their way into the real world of the film during its finale, perhaps to punctuate the unreality of it all, or perhaps to simply add a little extra flourish. And in there lay what some might consider the film's prevailing negative strike. These elements may not serve as much to heighten the film's reality so much as they highlight how artificial it all seems. The film is amusing in the almost absurd way it intends to be, but its dramatic efforts are undone by its sense of artificiality. Tetris's tallest hurdle to overcome may be its air of contrivance. It's not about being real as much as it is a feeling of being authentic, and the film doesn't seem interested in creating an authentic world to invest in. But video games weren't the only products breaking down barriers in the 80s, and a few years before Hank and Alexi spread 8-bit joy around the world, another player was about to change the way not one, but two games were played forever. Sonny Vaccaro is a basketball guru and gambler trying to break a losing streak at Nike's basketball division when he convinces Running Man head honcho Phil Knight to bet it all on red to endorse a rookie player who has yet to step on the pro court. Air is directed by Ben Affleck from a screenplay by Ben Convery. The film stars Matt Damon, Jason Bateman, Chris Tucker, Marlon Wayans, Matthew Marr, Ben Affleck, and Viola Davis. For basketball fans, it's hard to imagine there was a world before Michael Jordan. Likewise, for fans of sneaker culture, it's hard to imagine there was a world before the Air Jordan, the athletic lifestyle product branded around the man some consider to be the GOAT. But nothing in this universe exists until it does, and Air, director Ben Affleck's first film since 2016's Live by Night, tracks how devoted Adidas fan Michael Jordan was swayed to enter into a partnership with Nike that changed the nature of the relationship between sports product companies and the athletes they work with. But the film isn't really about that, and in fact, Jordan is barely even a character in it. We never see the face of the actor portraying him in the few scenes he appears, and he doesn't speak more than a couple of words. The film is really about how people like Sonny Vaccaro and Phil Knight, along with Jordan's mother Dolores, took a huge gamble on an approach that positioned the athlete as more important than the product. They didn't wear the shoe because the shoe was special. The shoe was special because they wore it. This mutually beneficial innovation in marketing would go on to reshape the entire industry, and Vaccaro would even go on to advocate for college players to receive compensation for the use of their names and likenesses some 30 years later. Affleck's previous films being somewhat taut dramas, this is the first time the director has leaned into the lighter side of his filmmaking nature, working with Damon to bring some of the smart aleck Boston banter they employed in their Good Will Hunting screenplay to bear. No one involved was attempting to cure cancer or solve world hunger, so the drama is tempered by humor drawn from the characters and their interactions. The movie is often funny, but it's not a comedy, so there are no gags or bits, though Tucker and Affleck do play a little big during different moments. Affleck's direction has to find a line of balance between Tucker's barely contained comedic energy, Damon's exasperated passion, Bateman's dry sarcasm, and Davis's anchoring stoicism. The only performer Affleck seems to have trouble finding a balance for is himself, as he can't seem to find the right rhythm as a friendly antagonist, and some of his own mannerisms break the illusion that he isn't Ben Affleck. Working with director of photography Robert Richardson, Affleck shoots digital on the fairly new Alexa 35, but manages to avoid the artificial patina that sometimes results. The film's 80s recreation is honest, creating an authentic feeling 1984 devoid of nostalgia or period romance. It has a solidly filmic look, which helps anchor its drama in a sense of reality, but it's not what one might consider a resoundingly cinematic presentation. It doesn't seem there's an attempt to recreate the look of vintage film stocks, but one would need to be familiar with what those late 70s, early 80s Eastman Kodak stocks look like, and doing that might distract from the vitality of the piece by making it appear antique. At best, you could say the filmmaking doesn't get in the story's way, but it's far from unpleasant to look at. The filmmaking did seem to become more engaged about halfway through the movie, but that may just be an observation born of increased engagement as the drama picks up steam. Of course, we all know that Jordan did sign with Nike, and the Air Jordan line has gone on to become one of the most successful sports products in history, so the story isn't really about that. The film creates emotional engagement by positioning Vaccaro as a slightly pathetic character and his team at the third place Nike betting everything they have on a last desperate shot to keep the basketball division and all the people it employs operating. The film positions these people as the underdogs to root for, the divorced dad who only sees his kid on weekends and lives for the joy she expresses getting a new pair of shoes every week, the injured ex-athlete who missed his shot, the awkward genius engineer who dreams of making the perfect basketball shoe, the dumpy middle-ager eating TV dinners alone. Even the CEO is positioned as a guy who's fighting not to lose his renegade spirit to the corporate board of the company he started out of the back of his car. The trick here was to make sure that even though we all know how it ends, not to treat that fact as a given and at least create the illusion that despite the history being etched in stone, there is the possibility that our underdog heroes may still lose. It's a trick the film pulls off not by contriving drama for the characters to overcome, but by creating likable characters that we want to see win. It's an interesting coincidence, but in very broad strokes, Tetris and Air are very much the same kind of movie. Both period pieces taking place only a few years apart, both featuring underdogs driven by passion and instinct to bring something magical to the world. Of course, both films exaggerate their situations to some degree. Vaquero didn't have to fight quite so hard to get Jordan's signature, and Roger's quest for distribution rights didn't end with a mad car chase to the airport. But if reality was as exciting as movies, we wouldn't need to make them. Given their broad similarity in premise, the two films could not be more different in approach. Both are entertaining in their own ways, but as films, I feel Air is a much stronger piece of work. Tetris strikes me as a less complex piece that you can feel trying to make something more out of the story, while Air's biggest weakness, in my opinion, is that you don't get to know its lead character as well as you do the characters around it. Sure, you understand where he is, but not how he got there. Both films try to make the characters' quest about more than their own personal gain. Tetris by quickly trying to build a personal bridge between Hank and Alexei, and Air through Sonny understanding that he's gambled with more than just his own future. Subjectively, I feel that Tetris was a little too cartoonish, simplified, and exaggerated for its drama to hit, while my biggest problem with Air is that I personally just don't care about the events it's covering. Like most people on the planet, I've played Tetris, but it's not like some life-affirming experience to do so, and I've never owned, nor have I ever wanted to own a pair of Air Jordans because, and I'm sure he's a lovely man, I just don't fucking care about Michael Jordan. Tetris is just a video game, and Air Jordans are just shoes, and I don't really look at them further than that. I felt that Air's drama was better grounded with its less exaggerated and more filmic presentation, even despite its somewhat distractingly on-the-nose needle drops. And I thought Tetris either went too far to be an effective drama or not far enough to emphasize its proposed absurdity, but either way, it just didn't have the impact I think it was reaching for beyond some moments of obvious sentiment. Now, I'm sure there are those that will flip their evaluations and find the unreliable narrator aspect of Tetris more engaging than Air's stylistically classic approach, but I just didn't think the former worked as well as the latter. Tetris is a film about obtaining video game publishing rights, and Air is a film about Nike signing Michael Jordan to a sneaker deal. Some people might ask, why tell these stories? Why now? Neither of these films cover anything particularly important on a larger human scale, despite their attempts to make it seem so, so why are these stories worth telling? It's because these stories aren't about video games and sneakers. The stories are about people, their lives and trials, and the relationships they have with others. And we tell them because these stories are ultimately about all of us, and that's all there really is. Every little bit of examination or reflection on any aspect of what we call the condition of being human adds to the totality of our understanding of ourselves. So what if the films aren't covering some world-bending cataclysmic event in politics or culture? Our world is full of stories. Everything in life has a story behind it, and if you know how to look for them, you can find something meaningful and important in any of them. It could be my story, or it could be yours, but in the end, the stories are about all of us. That's why they matter. This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopular-opinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.